All right, good morning, everybody. I've got 9 a.m., so we're going to go ahead and get started. Mark, can you see the buyer agency agreement? Did I share my screen appropriate? Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure, still getting used to Google Meet. Good morning, everyone. We are going to kick off this morning by starting with going over some changes to our buyer tenant exclusive agency contract. This has been out there for a couple weeks. It's already up in DocuSign and the DMS for you guys to be using it. So most of you are already using it, but I did want to just take a few minutes to point out the changes that were made so that you are aware of them. Last week, I gave you homework to actually sit down and read this contract all the way through. If you haven't done that, I would encourage you to take the time to do that. Let us know if you have any questions. The first change that's right in your face and very obvious is that we have made this contract more tenant friendly. So we've tweaked the language a little bit. Basically, anywhere it says buyer, it could now mean tenant. And anywhere it says purchase, it could now mean a lease. That language is in that first paragraph. And just a reminder, if you are helping a tenant secure a rental property, this document is required as well. So if you're representing a renter, you do need to have this agreement signed. Now the language should make it work a little more easily than it did before for those purposes. Also had a question this week about, do I need one of these agreements if I'm representing a buyer purchasing vacant land? And the answer is yes. So any purchase or rental, you do need this contract. And again, you need it signed before you start acting like the realtor. So keep that in mind. So that's the first change. A couple other things. So if you look at that section on line 10 where buyer agrees, so a lot of that language is new to this agreement. It's basically saying that the buyer acknowledges that they are not in another agreement with another agent that conflicts with this one. And so what we mean by that, had a great example this week. One of you called me with a buyer who is still debating between buying in Northern Indiana and Indianapolis as an example. So you could potentially have an agreement with two different agents, one for Michigan City, Indiana, and one for Indianapolis. So that is an arena where we would want you to utilize that description field, obviously, because you want to make sure that your agreement is not in conflict with any other agreement a buyer might have signed. It's a good idea if you have questions to ask. If they've already entered it to another agreement, ask to see it and make sure you're not going to be entering into an agreement that potentially conflicts, because you'll see in that bold print on line 13, entering into multiple buyer agreements, buyer understands they could be obligated for multiple commission fees. So just wanted to point that out. The other changes, I'm scrolling down to this commission section. Just kidding, if I can figure out how to do it. Under brokers compensation. So just some changes here, and a lot of it's just kind of tweaking the language, but do want to point out the language on line 29. So it does basically say again that if you receive any compensation, that it is all credited towards the buyer's obligation to pay you. It does say that this is where it does say that the broker shall make an attempt to cause the seller or seller's agent to satisfy the buyer's obligation to the broker. So I've seen some of you guys writing that into further conditions. You don't have to write it in. It's in there. It's right there on line 32. The broker shall make an attempt to cause the seller or the seller's agent to pay it. And then it does say there in bold print on line 34 that the buyer is obligated to the broker for the difference in the event that the seller is only paying a portion of the commission due. And that line 35 is where it says you cannot receive any more from any source that exceeds the amount of the agreement. So this has come up multiple times in the last few weeks with bonuses from builders. If a bonus from a seller in any situation, whether that's a builder or just a typical property owner, forces your commission into a higher bracket than what you've signed this agreement for, you either have to not accept that commission or have your buyer amend the agreement. So something to keep in mind for sure. Scrolling down to letters B and C, under brokers' compensation, those are new. Well, excuse me, part B is new and part of C is new. So basically B just establishes that if the buyer or anyone acting on their behalf acquires a property, then you would be due compensation. And then C, we changed this. This is in line with the changes that IAR made, and I think this was a good change. Basically, our old version on this on line 51. It used to say months. So basically, if this the contract ends and your buyer goes out and buys a property after the end of this contract, it used to say months. Now it says days. So you could fill in the appropriate amount of days there. Think of this just like your listing contract. It's now essentially the same language, that basically if they go out and make a purchase, it's meant to be with, pretty quickly after the contract terminates, that then you would still be due commission. And that, however, we've added language now that says it does not apply if the contract terminates and they have entered into an agreement with another licensed broker. So again, it's the same language essentially as what's in your listing contract, but that's now been tweaked. And then language that you might be excited about, that top of page 2, that's new, but basically it says that if a buyer defaults on a valid, fully executed purchase agreement, if they default on that purchase, you could still be due commission. So this is not, it falls apart on inspection. This is, hey, I just changed my mind and I no longer want to purchase this house. You could potentially still be due commission now that language is in there. And then there's some new language as well on line 60, basically just about when commission is due and payable at the closing, that it's basically due upon demand. And then if it's not paid when it's due, that the brokerage could be entitled to interest on that commission if it's not paid. So those are the main changes, but there's one more really important one I do want to point out because I think a lot of you haven't noticed it yet, and that is, where is it? Sorry, I've got multiple versions in front of me, old ones and new ones. So on lines 134 through 137, you'll notice that this is now a field that needs to be completed on this agreement, and it was not there before. So just want to point that out. It's this language right here, asking the buyer as a part of this agreement to decide whether or not they do or do not give consent to limited agency. So just want to point that out. Make sure that you're activating those check boxes and making sure that your buyer is checking that box when if they're e-signing, or if you're signing in person, that you are taking a minute to go over that section and make sure that's completed before you have them sign it. And the rest of the contract is all essentially the same. You are going to notice that it looks a little different. Primarily, I just basically cleaned up the formatting a little bit. So it's a little easier. I think it's a little cleaner and a little more concise, even though it's a long contract. I've had a couple of you guys talk about the fact that it's long compared to maybe the IAR form or other forms, but just a reminder that it does include our policy on agency and our affiliated business disclosure. So it does eliminate the need for any other additional documents. So if that's on your mind, that's part of the reason why it's a little more wordy than the IAR form, is because it does include that extra language. So I'm going to open it up. If there's any questions, you can throw them in the chat or unmute yourself real quick before I hand it over to Mark. No? Is that easy? Cool. Well, Mark, if you have anything you want to add on those changes, or I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Megan.
You're welcome.
Morning, everybody. We are going to have Rosie joining us at the end of the call today to do her 5-minute tech tip. But I get you for a good chunk of the call today. I'm going to take a look at some market information, and we're going to talk a little bit about mindset. I think there's some pretty interesting research coming out. We've had just enough market activity in transactions that nationally, some of the bigger real estate media companies and research companies have compiled some pretty interesting survey information from consumers and realtors post August 17th, when all the changes went into effect. And I think there's some really interesting stuff there. But I'm going to first look at our spreadsheet. It's been almost a month since we looked at, just to look at some active data, some inventory numbers, because I think these are critical to how we can intentionally form our mindset rather than unintentionally letting some things around us form our mindset. So I'll share more, but I'm going to start with our spreadsheet. So quick reminder that although this is Indianapolis addresses, single family homes, I do check some state information and central Indiana information. This holds up, and I'm going to share some central Indiana information in a moment. But I think this is really interesting. If you look at looking at column B, that's active single family homes for sale. It's the highest that number's been in quite some time. And it's primarily the result of 511 units being listed in the last 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago today was when the Fed announced the 0.5 point rate drop. And this is it's rare that the data works out this cleanly to demonstrate. Guys, my opinion, for the second half of September, to have a 2-week period of time where a bunch of houses listed is a bit abnormal, right? We're used to seeing there'll be 2-week periods of time in late winter, early spring, where a bunch of houses list. But typically the second half of September, that's a lot of houses to list in the second half. So I think it's pretty clear that the rate drop, the announcement of the rate drop, did what it was intended to do, which is provide a spark of motivation to both buyers and sellers. Many of you are experiencing this. Note here over on the right-hand column I, this is a Google algorithm reminder of what is a typical high down payment, good credit score buyer getting right now in a 30-year fixed. This doesn't necessarily mean 6.5 is the lowest advertised rate that your lender has, but this is like an algorithm for what's actually closing right now. So I think the trend is likely lower than 6.5. I think this is great news because the issue in our marketplace really now for 4 years has been inventory. Like that, there's a lot of things that go into why is inventory low, but nationwide, state of Indiana, Lafayette, West Lafayette, Evansville, Newburgh, Indianapolis Metro, I think pretty much all stakeholders of the real estate industry would say it'd be good if there was a bit more inventory. And so there's movement in that direction, which is one reason I'm going to give you to be positive in your mindset. I'm going to stop my share on that. I'm going to show one more inventory piece that I thought was pretty interesting. So this is Marion County, and then all the continuous counties around Marion County and a couple counties to the south of that. So this data right here makes up almost half of the state of Indiana's real estate transactions. So it's a pretty good indicator of what's happening in the state. And this is active inventory. Notice there are more homes for sale in that region than there have been since before the pandemic. That's a really interesting piece of information. And I think if you are a professional in a business that relies on transaction volume, this is really good news for you. We want this line trending up. Yes, for a seller in a lot of marketplaces, this will mean the market's going back toward buyer and seller balanced, right? So this will mean if the line continues to trend in the direction that it's going, it does mean we're going to see fewer and fewer of the 10 offers on a home, because as inventory rises, buyers just have more options to move. Like they can go right or left to find something else rather than competing with 9 other buyers. But generally speaking, this is great news for the marketplace and certainly great news for a real estate professional. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop my share for a moment and shift gears a little bit and say, I always think mindset is important, like to the life of a business owner, to a real estate professional, where you are the one most in control of your outcomes, right? I think this is a good reminder, like, yes, buyers and sellers have impact on your outcomes, the real estate industry, the settlement changes, your local marketplace, price adjustments, pressure on commission, all of these things are outside of your control and they do impact your business, but all of them summed together don't impact your business nearly as much as you personally do. And so, y'all have heard me get on my soapbox about this, but your mindset is the single biggest contributor to the success that you will have in the industry. And right now is one of those moments where there's just a lot of narratives, some positive, some negative. And I'm going to finish my time looking at a T360. It's a research organization in our industry that you've heard me reference before. I'm going to reference some data that they've just pulled together over the last month, which is really interesting. They've surveyed a lot of realtors and asked some mindset questions. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler here. Our industry is right now, it's incredibly negative. I just want to reference that. I'm not talking buyers and sellers, realtors. Real estate agents across the country are incredibly negative right now. I already knew that, or at least that was my experience. So anecdotally, I would have said that. The results of this T360 research prove my point that realtors are very negative right now. And y'all, that is an opportunity for you. It's absolutely an opportunity for you. It could be a challenge for you if you let it. And so I'm going to highlight a couple headlines. I used to do this a little bit more often than I have recently. I'm not really going to dive into the articles. I'm just going to highlight 3 different resources, what their current headline was on an article that they put out recently, and just highlight some of the verbiage to illustrate some of this, like how is a narrative or how is a mindset formed, particularly if we're not intentional about forming it. So number 1. Okay, there you go. This Powell is referring to the chair of the Federal Reserve. So he is the individual that's the most influential in setting interest rates. Powell says recession risk gone, but housing inflation will persist for some years. Federal Reserve Chair admitted he misjudged the persistence of housing price increases, but lauded the broader economy. I think that's a really interesting headline, that the Federal Reserve Chair admitting that he misgauged something. But basically what that means is the interest rate increase for over the last 2 years was intended. One of the things that the Federal Reserve hoped that it accomplished is that it would stop housing prices from going up. Right? So that after back-to-back years of 15% price increase for housing, the Federal Reserve said, we have to slow that down. And the way that they do that is they crank interest rates up. Well, what it did is it slowed down the increase. So both in Indiana and nationally, housing prices have still gone up over the last 2 years. I think this is a really interesting data point in terms of both your advice to buyers, particularly first-time buyers, and your mindset as a realtor. That like there can be this attitude of like, oh well, the prices have to correct. People are just going to sit on the sidelines. 2 years ago, particularly a year ago, when interest rates were going up, remember there was this like, oh man, no way, this has to lead to a price correction, a price reduction. Prices are going to go down. It's going to crash. Right? I even remember sharing a meme that my nephew, who's in his at the time he was 22, sent me about the housing market crashing. I shared it on a Wednesday morning call. In hindsight, I think it's interesting to point out that buyers who waited, remember we talked about this, buyers who waited made a bet that didn't pay off in most marketplaces around the country. Now you could say, well, interest rates are lower now. It's a better time to buy. Fair. But if a buyer had bought 18 months ago, what would they be doing right now? Well, they're likely refinancing. Right? So they're still getting the upside of what happened 2 weeks ago. So that's a little bit of a backwards looking, like what was the mindset 12 to 18 months ago in terms of when rates went up? And there was this like, everybody's going to sit it out. Like, well, we actually do have some influence over that. Like our perspective and our mindset impacts the activity of at least some of our consumers. Okay, I'm going to share my next one. I love this headline. This is like prototypical. This is Housing Wire, which is a publication that I like, by the way. I'm not trying to knock Housing Wire. I read it almost every day. Pending home sales rise slightly, but continue to muddle along. Do you catch the tone? Despite a monthly increase, contract signings were still down 3% annually in August, according to NAR. It's like Eeyore is reading the housing news. Like that's the word choice. It's essentially saying activity went up, but not as much as it could have. And yeah, this last month was good, but if you add up the 9 months of the year, or the 8 months of the year, like it still doesn't look all that great. And I'm like, my goodness, like this is the first time in a while that pending home sales have risen like they did, and then active inventory jumped a bunch. So there's really good reason to think that pending home sales are going up pretty significantly over the next 30, 60 days. And it's just like they want to include the words muddle and despite and down in the headline. This is just an anecdotal example. Again, I'm not trying to knock the publication or the author. Their job is to get attention, and these sorts of headlines work. I just want to highlight that we can let that set our, mindset and expectations, or we can try to see it for what it is. Okay, I'm going to jump to my next one. I got 2 more before I share some of the T360 results. This one I am going to send out. I thought this was a really interesting interview. Some of you may recognize Mark Fisher. Mark attended one of our monthly agent meetings earlier this year. Many of you probably recognize Shelly as well. She's the CEO of MyBor. I thought this was a real quick nice interview of the two of them that IBJ did. I'll send this out later. But I thought this was an interesting first question. It's talking about first-time home buyers being squeezed out of the marketplace. Do you see the situation improving in 2025? And I appreciated both of their answers. They said, well, interest rates going down helps them for sure, helps first-time home buyers, but affordability because of inventory is still a challenge. So like the formula has all these variables. One variable just got better. So they both reference this in their answer, which I appreciate. So they're saying, well, there's all these things that combine to impact affordability for a first-time home buyer. One of them just improved. Now, I understand why they don't go there in this interview, but y'all, we've talked about this before. What happens when interest rates go down? What happens to one of these other variables, which is the price of the house? Well, it goes up, right? And so I think this still is good information to get at, like, how do you impact the mindset of a potential first-time home buyer if they're choosing to sit on the sidelines? Now, I think so many of them are interest rate focused that we've talked about this before. Maybe the best piece of practical advice I have for you right now is what I said 2 weeks ago when the interest rate drop was announced, which is check in with your people. Right now is as high of a value as we're likely going to have in years for you to just put yourself in front of your potential clients. Check in with them, find a way to add value, reach out, be in contact, especially with potential first-time buyers that have been sitting on the sidelines. Inventory is going up, interest rates went down. One of the two was likely playing a factor, if not both of them, in that buyer waiting. Okay. So I think being proactive and being in front of them, very good time to do that. Okay. Last headline before some T360 stuff. A month after seismic industry changes, real estate agents aren't much more optimistic. I would agree. This is an interesting article. I'm going to highlight one piece of this here. Okay, hopefully that's highlighting for all of you. Despite the improvements in agent sentiment, so this is like from basically when the settlement came into effect to a bit later, what's the trend line on agent sentiment? What they're saying is like, well, it's improving a bit. So despite the improvements in agent sentiment, 72% of agents reported that they feel the settlement will have a negative impact on the industry, while 20% are anticipating a positive impact. Okay, 72 to 20. 7 out of 10 versus 2 out of 10. In addition, 48% of agents said their overall outlook on their real estate career has become more pessimistic since the business practice changes went into effect in mid-August, compared to 16% who report feeling more optimistic. So the first question is just kind of general agent sentiment about the industry. The second is quite a bit more specific about, okay, but how do you feel about the outlook of your career? There's a pretty good sample size in this survey, and I buy it. I believe that it is an accurate representation of the going sentiment in the industry. Half. There's 1.5 million realtors in the United States. 750,000 of them. In central Indiana, that's 10,000 realtors, so 5,000 of them. In Indiana, I believe that number is roughly double. So let's say in all of Indiana, it's 20,000 realtors, 10,000 of them would say that their overall outlook in their real estate career has become more pessimistic since the business practice changes went into effect, compared to 16% who report feeling more optimistic. I want to make 2 points about this. Point number one, I actually believe the settlement is good news for you because I believe you are a good realtor. So I want to be the second point I'm going to make could sound like I'm suggesting just build, like engineer, conjure up a positive mindset. Like if you got to do that, I'm in support of it. But the first point I want to make, this settlement favors a realtor that provides good value, is good at their job, is honest with their client, and knows it. So the agent that provides the value and can articulate it, this settlement is good news for you. Okay. I think the reason that half of our industry has had a more pessimistic outlook over the last 45 days is a combination of the fact that some people don't agree with my statement. They don't view it that way. They think it's bad news for everybody somehow, or they just don't have confidence in the value that they provide to the consumer, and they likely never did. So that sounds harsh, but I think that's a big part of the reason that people have a more pessimistic view is they don't believe they were worth what they were making. And if you don't believe that you were worth what you were making, then this settlement was bad news. So I suppose I would agree with some portion of the 48% of those agents. Like, yep, this is bad news for you. You weren't providing value. You could not articulate or defend that value. This will be negative in terms of its impact to your business. Therefore, you should be pessimistic. But I don't believe that about you as a group of agents. So to be clear, I think this is actually great news. My hope is that our entire company is in the 16% that says, yeah, all right, there's a little bit of inconvenience to the change. I have to learn some new things. There's conversations I'm not used to having. I got to grow. I got to stretch. But at the end of the day, I believe I provide the value. Therefore, I believe I'm worth what I'm getting paid. Therefore, this change is good news for me. Right? The second point I will make is what I was getting to earlier about the opportunity in this. Porter just chimed in, and it's funny, as Porter just jumped into the chat and said bye. For a split second, Andy, I thought you were just logging off the call and saying bye, and I was like, see you, Porter. Then I was like, oh my gosh, no, I know what he's saying. Appreciate you, Andy. Andy is saying, well, what that means is that some of those 48% of realtors with a more pessimistic outlook that don't understand their value are leaving the industry. And I think Andy is saying, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Good riddance. So I'll just let Andy say that for me. But I think that gets at like some of what the opportunity is here. There is market share to be had. If half of the industry is more pessimistic than they were 2 months ago, there's market share to be had. And those 16% of agents that have a more favorable view of their career, that's the 16% that's going to take that market share from the 48% that are pessimistic. That's how life works. Okay, I'm going to stop my share and I'll give you one more stat. And I'm happy to take questions or comments as well. So drop those into the chat if you would like. T360 did this pretty interesting. So that Housing Wire research was a big part of that. They were asking realtors, right? What's your outlook right now? T360 surveyed a pretty good sample size of consumers that have closed a transaction in the last 30 days. And this just came out. And I think this is fascinating, but they asked a lot of questions about basically, how do you feel about your realtor? How did they do? Do you like them? Do you love them? Do you not like them at all? Do you trust them? How do you feel about how they got paid? How do you feel about how much they got paid? And of course, there's a broad range of answers. Consumers always have a broad range of experiences and feelings about their professional and their professional's compensation. But I want to highlight two things. One's kind of anecdotal trivia. Anybody want to take a guess? Which is higher? The percentage of the people in the United States that can tell you what the three branches of our government are, or the percentage of people in the United States that can tell you what just happened in the real estate industry? Which is higher, the percentage of people in the United States that can explain what the three branches of government are, or the percentage of people that could articulate to you what just happened in the settlement? Can I get some answers in the chat? Rosie says she's not going to answer. I mean, this kind of speaks to how much confidence you have in the populace of the United States, but nobody's going to try and answer. Somebody give me a guess. Tell me what they think the answer is.
I would guess it's likely equal.
Carissa says they're very close. Okay. They are actually very close. You guys are, man, you're not feeling it. Okay. The sole agent meeting gave us an answer. Thank you. They said more people in the country understand what happened in the settlement than could articulate the three branches of government, and they are correct. So your consumers know something about what happened a month ago, and they can't tell you what the executive branch is of the United States federal government, I guess. But I just kind of, obviously that's anecdotal, but one of the results of the research was that a fairly high percentage of the country can articulate what just happened, which I think is interesting. They broke it out, and so not surprising, the higher the income, the more likely that person is to be able to articulate to you what just happened. So I think there's this broad, pretty general understanding that didn't exist prior to July. Like after the settlement had happened, there was months where all of the research indicated the populace and the consumer doesn't really know or understand. Once it went into effect, I think that scale tipped. So most people get it. Last data point that I want to give you. And I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the T360 study next week. But I just want to highlight their last slide in this presentation was zeroing in on consumers who either liked or loved their realtor. Okay, so this is the segment of consumers that just finished a transaction and have positive things to say about their realtor. All right, so picture that consumer in your mind right now. When asked, do you feel like your agent earned what they got paid or earned more than they got paid? In other words, they were underpaid, or they didn't earn what they got paid. And I feel like they probably got overpaid. 60% of those consumers said, I think my agent made what they should have made. They earned their income, happy to pay them. 60%. 22% of them answered yes and then some, meaning I actually think my agent earned what they made and they earned money that they didn't get paid. 19% of them said, yeah, not really. I don't think they earned what they got paid. The point I want to make with that data is that if the consumer thinks the realtor did their job, if the consumer thinks the realtor added value, was professional, helped them accomplish their goal, and was trustworthy, they liked or loved them, more consumers believe the agent was underpaid than overpaid. That's post-settlement. If we do dive in next week, you're going to see that the data looks quite a bit different for those that did not like or love their realtor. The point that I would make about the research that I found really compelling and affirming was that essentially the consumer's feeling about their agent's income was directly correlated to whether the consumer feels like their agent did a good job. So it's not correlating to they just flat out in general earn too much money. The populace is not saying that as a result of research. What they're saying is, if my realtor sucked, they got paid too much money. And if my realtor was good, they got paid the right amount, or maybe slightly could have made more money. I think that's really encouraging research. I think it affirms, or it lines up and correlates to this mindset that half of our industry has, which is, yeah, again, just to hit the point home, if you didn't believe the value you were providing was worth that money a year ago, then your consumer probably didn't either. If you didn't believe it, they didn't believe it. And your outlook on real estate's likely negative now. But if you believe that our profession, if done correctly, is adding value to the consumer, and you do that, your consumer very likely agrees with you and is verifying this when research is done, saying, yeah, I think they earn what they got paid. So I hope that's an encouragement to you. I think it gives us good reason to move forward with confidence about our value proposition. We've talked often about how you can set the tone with buyers and sellers to be about value, not price. And I would just say, keep front of mind that when surveyed, if consumers believe their realtor did a good job, they by and large are totally fine with what the realtor made. My guess is that is true for your consumers. So, okay, Rosie, I'm going to hand it off to you to take it away on a tech tip. Y'all, thanks as always for joining. I'm going to send out the IBJ article with Mark and Shelly on it. And I won't be with you next week. Megan will be, and I think we're going to take a look at this T360. I know at some point in the next 2 or 3 weeks we will. It'll just kind of depend on what happens in the market between now and then. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, don't leave the call because I've got some real hot tips for you guys today. But first, while I have a captive audience, the other thing that I'm responsible for is events. And I just wanted to remind you that Ninja is coming up. The sign up for that will cut off at the end of October. So sign up now. I'm dropping the link in the chat so that you guys can do that. Remember that you can pay the full ticket price, which is $950, but then we also have a payment plan where you pay $300 up front, and then your next 2 payments are split up into your next 2 commission payments. And of course, as soon as I'm ready to talk, Mowgli just like only wants to be in my lap. So you guys get a little Mowgli action today. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to say is that we have 4 scholarships that we are giving away for Ninja this year. So if you feel like, you know, you really want to do it, that cost is going to be too much for you. We have 4 scholarships to give away. I've only had 1 person apply so far. So far that person's getting a guaranteed scholarship. So if you guys want to, get a scholarship, please apply. And the link to apply is down here. Solo group. Yes, we've emailed the link multiple times. It just went out yesterday with the email that I sent to the brokerage, or I guess that went out on Monday. Okay, I'm gonna skip over into some text stuff. I actually have 3 things to go over with you today. Number 1 is the thing that I hinted at during business planning last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever that was. Your appointment scheduler. So remember, Josh Newman mentioned Calendly as a way for you guys to send a link to your clients and for them to automatically book appointments with you. So that functionality is actually all built into Google, your Google Suite that you have access to from this company. So I want to show you how that works. Okay, so I'm on my calendar here. I actually clicked off my calendar because I didn't want you guys to get overwhelmed. But so there are 2 different ways to set this up. Remember, this is a link you can send out to your clients that says, hey, these are the times that I'm available to show you a house or book a listing appointment or what have you. So you can start this in 2 different ways. Number 1, I can say, okay, so on Thursdays, I can say I'm available from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and I can hit this appointment schedule and I can hit set up the schedule here and it's going to take me to the same thing I'm going to see somewhere else. So your second way is to hit this create button and hit appointment schedule. And this is going to take you through the whole prompt. So I'm going to say my title is schedule a tour with me. And then I'm going to say I can choose the appointment duration. So I'll say 45 minutes. You can choose whatever you want. And then you'll say what times you're available. So maybe I'm available from 9 to 1 p.m. every day. And then I want to add another block of 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And then if I wanted to just go ahead and copy that to all the rest of my days, I can just copy that time to all. I can also say, you know what, I'm not available on Wednesdays. So yeah, you can play around with that as much as you want. And then it's going to have all of these different options for you. So you can set a scheduling window. So you can say, hey, I'm really not going to let people book more than 2 months in advance. That's just too much. I don't want people to be booking way out. And then I can also say, okay, I'm not going to let people book like this afternoon, like right now. So I can say they need to book it at least 4 hours in advance. And then you can adjust your availability. So for instance, you can say, okay, normally I'm available during all these times, but I'm going to be on vacation the last week in October. And I can choose those dates and say I'm unavailable then. And then these are just some appointment settings. So you can say, I want a 10-minute buffer in between every appointment and a max amount of bookings I'll take per day. Okay. And then this is where you're going to see your different calendars show up. So I unclicked all my calendars, which means they're not showing up here. This is functionality that you're not going to see if you're just using your regular Gmail account. So if you have like a rosiesellshouses@gmail.com. This is not available on just the basic plans. You have to pay a lot of money for Google in order to get this functionality. So you're going to want to use this on your app properties account. But this is going to show all the different calendars you have, and you can select which ones you want, and it'll adjust your availability based on times you've already booked there. So maybe if you have a calendar for your kiddos and you like have all of their baseball or ballet stuff blocked off, it won't allow for times to be available during that. You can also have co-hosts. So maybe you have a buyer agent or you have a mentee that you want to come along to all of your appointments. You can add them so that they'll get an invite to all those too. And then this last thing here, your location and preference. So you can say, okay, this is a virtual meeting, in person, yada, yada. Probably if you're meeting at a house, it would be specified later. You can add in any description. You can make your clients do like a booking form. So their name and email address, and then you can add in like, what house do you want to see? And then once you're ready, you're going to hit save. And then you can even preview your booking page. So if you wanted to look at that and see all the different times you have available, this is what it will look like to your client when they are booking. And then you can just use this hand it in to share option. Okay, so feel free to ask me any questions about that if you have it. Okay, and then I have two more things to show you in Platform today. We had some really exciting updates come to us last week, so I'm just going to go over those. So I'm in Platform here, and a lot of you guys are probably already familiar because you've used the DMS in the last week, but I am going to take you into a property folder here, which remember is for a listing. If you remember when you were accessing docs in your property folder previously, you'll hit on documents, you'll hit on DocuSign. On this second step, so if I hit continue and under recommended forms, we just had like a list of a bunch of forms that you would typically use if you were creating a listing, and they were all pre-checked for you and you had to uncheck them if you didn't want it. Yada, yada, yada. I'm going to give you some backstory here. So obviously this is a partnership with DocuSign, and DocuSign had control of those recommended forms before. So we were finding like forms we didn't want were getting thrown in there, or it was just more buggy or whatever. So at Chicago created this new situation that I think will be a lot better, and it's called packets. So rather than having like a million forms here that we recommend you use, we have these packets. So it's okay. So for an improved property, you'll see the typical documents that you're going to need there are already included. And you can just say, yep, I want that whole listing packet. And what's great if you're like, okay, I need the sales disclosure, but I don't know that I really need the lead-based paint. You can select it here. And then in this next step, you'll see now you have those individual forms. So I can just unclick that lead-based paint. And then remember, you're still going to have the option of like literally all of the forms. So you can grab those there too. So that's a fun update. And then the last one, I saved the best for last because this is a feature that I've been asking for like years, and it's finally here. So over in your left side panel under resources, there is this documents tab here. This has always existed, but they gave it a huge facelift, and now you can print off blank contracts right from here rather than creating a property folder and filling it out and then downloading it blank. You can download it right from here. So if I click on our little folder, I can grab buyer agency contract, and here it is. I can just print it off straight from here. So that will have literally, I don't know if the way I'm sharing, I'm not sure if you guys were able to see when I pulled up that contract, but it basically, you'll just be able to print it off straight from there. This is going to have all of our personal brokerage forms, all of the MIBOR forms, all the IAR forms, and then a bunch of other stuff that I threw in there when we were creating Platform that now I need to go back and edit. But this is stuff that I'm really excited about. Hopefully that will make your life a little easier when you just need to print off regular documents. That's all I have for you. I feel like I talked really fast, so feel free to hit me up with questions if you have them. Thanks. Mark, Megan, anything else to add before we bounce off here? Nope. Lovely. Okay, everyone have a great Wednesday. Follow up with me if you have any tech questions. Cheers.
See you, everybody.